Good evening, you. Somewhere between the heaviness of today and the softness of tonight, you've chosen to let your mind drift somewhere kinder than your notifications. You're about to float along a slow Amazonian river under towering trees and silver mist and let the forest do the thinking for you. Out there in real life, trying this alone, you probably wouldn't survive past lunchtime, and somehow that makes this imaginary trip feel even cozier. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been, your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now turn off the lights. Take a deep, slow breath, let your tiredness melt away, and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. You are already there, sitting low in a narrow canoe as a thin band of dawn stretches along the horizon. The river is broad and slow beneath you, a bronze-green sheet that lifts and lowers the boat in an almost sleepy rhythm. Mist hangs just above the surface, swallowing and releasing the far bank, so that trees appear and fade like thoughts drifting in and out of focus. On both sides, the rainforest leans in, tall, tangled, and utterly indifferent to who you are. You let the current do most of the work. Every so often, you dip the paddle into the water with an unhurried motion, just enough to keep the canoe pointed upstream. Ripples slide out from the blade and are swallowed almost at once by the river's wider flow. With each quiet push, your shoulders sink a little lower, your jaw unclenches a little more, and the tight coil of urgency you carried onto the water loosens by degrees you can finally feel. As your breathing slows, the sounds around you sharpen. Closest are the small, precise noises, the drip of water leaving the paddle, the faint knock of wood, the brief flick of something tiny breaking the surface and vanishing. Behind those lies a soft curtain of insect buzz and scattered bird calls, never silent, but never demanding. Warm, heavy air settles on your skin, smelling of wet soil, dark bark, and a thin sweetness from unseen blossoms, so that each breath feels thick but grounding. Little by little, the light strengthens. Gray thins into muted gold that filters through gaps in the canopy, laying narrow bands of brightness across the river. In one of those bands, something interrupts the easy pattern of roots and rocks. First a straight edge, then another, a pale angle where there should only be curves. As you glide nearer, it resolves into a small log landing and a simple platform on sturdy poles, with raised walkways and woven walled homes half hidden behind trunks and leaves, thin smoke rising above them. A small flutter stirs in your chest, the feeling that always comes when you meet a threshold. Your fingers tighten for a moment on the rim of the canoe, as if clinging to the last stretch where this could still be distant scenery and not connection. You could let the current carry you past and pretend the glimpse was enough. Instead, the same quiet impulse that led you here settles warm and steady beneath your ribs, and you angle the paddle so the boat glides toward the bank where reeds and dragonflies wait. The canoe bumps lightly against the logs with a subdued, certain sound, then rocks once and stills. From the shade beyond the platform, you sense eyes on you. Curious, attentive, but calm, echoing the patient regard the forest has held since you arrived. You rise slowly, shift your weight from boat to landing, and feel cool, faintly damp wood under your soles, springy with the memory of many floods. For one long breath, you hover between moving river and rooted paths. Then you exhale and take a deliberate step toward the low arch of roots and vines that marks the settlement's hidden gateway. You stand for a moment before the low arch, the way you might pause at the door of a room you're not sure you're invited into, even though the door is wide open and nobody seems particularly interested in throwing you out. The arch isn't built so much as grown. Thick buttress roots rise from their trees and curve inward, meeting above your head where vines and aerial roots lace together into a living doorway. Ferns spill from the crevices, and tiny white flowers cling to the bark like stars caught in slow motion. The air feels different here, just a few steps away from the river. On the water, the breeze moved freely, carrying mist and the smell of distance. Under the arch, the air is stiller, warmer, pressed close. It carries the damp perfume of old leaves, crushed herbs, and distant smoke, as if the forest has been simmering for a very long time and you're finally stepping into the kitchen. You lift a hand to steady yourself on one of the roots, and the texture surprises you. It isn't smooth like the varnished surfaces you're used to touching all day. It's ridged and cool, streaked with moss, faintly sticky in places where sap has bled and dried. Ants traverse it in determined lines, flowing around your fingers as if you were just another temporary obstacle in their endless commute. They do not hurry. None of this place hurries. A few steps in, the sounds shift. The river's broad hush softens behind you, replaced by layers of smaller noises. A faint tapping of insects in the undergrowth, the hollow knock of something dropping from the canopy, the distant whooping call of a bird that seems to be laughing at a joke only the treetops understand. Leaves whisper against one another high above, but down here the sound is muffled, like walking through a dream where everything has edges but no sharp corners. The path beneath your feet is springy, not neatly paved or predictably flat. It's made of earth that has been stepped on for generations, mixed with fallen leaves, strands of vine, and the faint crunch of old shells. Each step sinks a little, then rises back, as if the forest is testing your weight and deciding you're acceptable. You realize you're automatically shortening your stride, softening your heels, trying not to announce yourself too loudly. Out here, your usual heavy-footed hurry would feel like shouting in a quiet room. Ahead, the root and vine arch doesn't simply stop, it transforms. The roots diverge and sink back into the earth, while the vines stretch upward, threading themselves between trunks to form a vague, shifting corridor. Sunlight filters through in slow, broken shafts, painting moving patterns that slide over your hands and face. Dust motes and tiny insects drift in those beams, turning the air into a slow, glittering river of its own. On one side of the path, a massive tree rises, its trunk so broad you would need several people to encircle it. Buttress roots fan out like frozen waves, creating small sheltered alcoves where ferns and moss thrive in extra shade. You catch the faint glint of beads or shells hanging from one of the roots, tied there with fibers that look like braided grass. A subtle boundary marker, perhaps, or an offering, or simply a reminder that this is not an untouched wilderness, but a home carefully stitched into the forest's fabric. The sense of being watched grows more distinct, but it isn't the sharp, prickling kind of being watched you know from crowded trains or brightly lit offices. It's more like the forest is aware of your presence the way your body is aware of a small pebble in your shoe. Not painful, just noticeable, something to keep track of. Eyes from the canopy, from small burrows, from human figures partially hidden behind woven walls and trunks you can't quite see yet, they are there measuring you not for your performance or your productivity, but for your staying power. Your breath naturally lengthens to match the slow pulse of this place. Inhale the smell of damp wood, rich soil, and something faintly spicy from a crushed leaf underfoot. Exhale the last scraps of noise from your day, the imagined glow of screens, the lists and worries that suddenly feel oddly flat compared to the towering, vertical insistence of these trees. Every exhale makes more space behind your ribs, as if the archway you just passed under has reappeared inside your chest. You notice how thoroughly the forest ignores straight lines. Vines loop and wander from trunk to trunk, some so thick they look like sleeping snakes, others as thin as threads, spiraling toward the light. Epiphytes cling to branches, living entire lives without ever touching the soil. Stubborn little reminders that there is more than one correct way to exist. You catch yourself smiling at that thought, a small, quiet curve of lips that no one sees, but you feel in your cheeks. As you move farther in, human traces appear with increasing clarity. A narrow bridge of woven wood spans a shallow ravine, its railings formed from interlaced branches still sprouting green leaves. Footprints press into the soft earth, some small, some wide, some decorated with simple patterns pressed by woven sandals. Bits of charcoal are scattered near what might have been an old fire pit, half reclaimed by moss. Nothing here is abandoned, it's simply in different stages of being taken back or offered forward again. The path curves, veering around a fallen giant whose trunk is now a long moss-covered hill. Fungi bloom along it in layered shelves, white, ochre, and dusky brown, like a quiet staircase for tiny, determined beings. You run your fingers along one of the shelves and feel the cool, damp resilience of it, unexpectedly firm against your touch. The forest models a kind of softness that isn't weak at all. It is flexible, layered, and very hard to break. Without quite realizing when it happens, you become aware that the forest's closeness no longer feels like it's closing in. It feels instead like it is closing around you, adjusting itself to make room, the way a blanket shifts and folds to accommodate the shape of a sleeping body. You are not here to conquer anything, not here to label and file and optimize. You are simply a passing guest, small but welcome enough, and the realization settles into you like warm tea. Ahead, through the leaves, shapes begin to emerge, the angled silhouettes of raised walkways, the sloping roofs of thatched shelters, the faint vertical lines of poles and ladders. The settlement is no longer an abstract idea on the far bank of a river. It is right here, pulsing gently within the forest's green lungs. You take another slow, deliberate breath and step forward, deeper along the path where the first human figures wait in the shade to see what kind of traveler you will be. You stepped from the last fringe of undergrowth into a space that feels like a held breath. The trees lean back just enough for light to spill down in soft, green-tinted sheets, and inside that loose circle of trunks, the settlement gathers itself. Narrow walkways of lashed poles wind between buttress roots, houses stand on stilts above the damp earth, roofs of layered leaves sloping like resting animals. Thin smoke threads upward toward the canopy, carrying the smell of charcoal and roasted something that makes your stomach quietly remember its existence. Beneath the largest platform, where the shade is deepest and the air cools by a small, blessed degree, a group waits. At first they are simply darker shapes, then your eyes adjust and faces appear. Closest are children, their bare feet powdered with fine dust, hair glossy with humidity. Some clutch woven toys, birds and fish braided from palm fiber, the edges fluffed by many fingers. Behind them sit elders with spines straight and legs folded, hands resting on their knees. Silver and iron-gray hair catches what little light filters down, and lines fan out from their eyes like river channels on a map. Habit tells you to reach for words, to line up a neat introduction about who you are, what you do, why you're here. But no one here seems in a hurry to break the quiet. The stillness is not awkward, it's simply full. So you let your arms hang loose at your sides, soften your jaw, and allow your breathing to match the slow insect hum around you. You meet their eyes without forcing a smile or a performance, as if this one time you are allowed to exist without a pitch. The children regard you the way forests regard weather, interested but not intimidated. Their eyes move over your shoes, your shirt, the strange straps of your bag, cataloging the little clues that say you come from somewhere noisy and brightly lit. One child kneads their toes into the earth, half behind a sibling yet leaning forward, caught between retreat and curiosity. Another peeks out from behind a post, watching until your gaze almost meets theirs, then vanishing again like a shy bird. You are not a spectacle here. You are simply new. Color pulls your attention next. Skin is marked with careful designs in deep red, charcoal black, and muted ochre. Lines cross foreheads, trace cheekbones, spiral along arms. Some patterns are sharp and geometric, others flow like vines or river bends. The pigments sit matte against the skin, clearly drawn from the same earth and bark surrounding you. You can't read their language yet, but you can feel the intention inside it. Roles, families, stories, all the things your world crams into titles and logos, written here in patient strokes instead of fonts. One elder rises with the unhurried ease of someone who has never needed a chair to stand up from. A single dark stripe runs down the bridge of their nose. Faint smudges of pigment soften the hollows around their eyes, as if the forest itself has underlined their face. They walk toward you without hurry, allowing the distance between you to shrink at a pace your nervous system can handle. When their gaze rests on you, it feels less like scrutiny and more like a weather report, present, factual, unconcerned with drama. A child steps forward carrying a shallow wooden dish with both hands. The wood is darkened and smooth from years of use. Inside lies a small arrangement, a strip of dried fruit, a few bright seeds, and a single feather that flashes green and blue where the light touches it. The child stops at arm's length and lifts the dish slightly. Nothing ceremonial, nothing theatrical, just an offering, suspended in the thick leaf-filtered air between you. You resist the impulse to overcompensate. No dramatic bow, no flustered grin. You simply extend your hands and accept the dish with a slow nod. The wood is warm from the child's palms. When you bite into the dried fruit, sweetness blooms on your tongue, dense and steady, pulling you down into the solid weight of your own body. The seeds click softly when you roll them between your fingers, tiny hard beads of stored potential. The feather's fine strands brush your skin when you turn it, leaving a faint shimmer where the light catches it. You may never know the full meaning of these objects here, but you understand enough. Something valued has been placed in your hands. The elder lifts a hand to their chest, then sweeps it outward in a small arc that seems to include you, the waiting children, and the ring of trees beyond. The gesture is simple and unhurried, but something in you responds as if to a complete sentence. For a brief moment, you feel yourself folded into a circle that existed long before your arrival and will continue long after you leave. You are not central to it. You are not even particularly necessary. Somehow, that realization relaxes your shoulders more effectively than any compliment ever has. Life continues at the edges of the clearing. Someone crosses a swaying walkway with a bundle of firewood balanced against one hip, bare feet sure on the uneven poles. Another tends a clay pot over a low, smoky fire, stirring slowly as fragrant steam curls up. Roots, herbs, something starchy and comforting. Chickens patrol beneath the platforms, scratching and muttering, wholly unimpressed by the dramatic arc of your personal growth. The children's posture loosens by degrees. One inches close enough to peer directly at your shoes, head tilted, fingers hovering just shy of touching the thick sole. Another reaches out to briefly brush the fabric of your sleeve, as if testing whether you are solid or some odd river mist wrapped in questionable fashion choices. You hold still, giving them time. Their verdict settles into the air around you. Confusing, but harmless. Above, the canopy filters sunlight into thin beams that wander slowly across faces and wooden posts, turning dust motes into tiny drifting stars. The air is cooler here, but still heavy, pressing gently down on your shoulders like a reminder to stay inside your body. Time loosens. No one checks a clock. The only schedule is the travel of shadows along the ground. When the elder finally turns and gestures toward the settlement's interior, the motion is small, almost casual, yet you feel its weight. Invitation extended. Invitation accepted. You step onto a narrow, gently swaying walkway, the wooden poles creaking under your feet, and follow them deeper into the canopy's shade, carrying the little dish like a passport the forest has stamped. The walkway leads you past the first cluster of shelters and out again toward the river, like a breath, inhaled into the forest and slowly exhaled back toward open water. Under your feet, the poles shift and creak, never quite still, but never truly unstable, the way a resting body still rises and falls with each breath. Between the gaps, you glimpse the forest floor, dark soil, scattered leaves, the occasional flash of a lizard slipping away from the shadow of your footsteps. Your hosts walk ahead with the quiet assurance of people who've repeated this path enough times that their bodies know it better than their minds. Shoulders loose, steps sure, attention outward. You notice how their gaze keeps returning to the river through narrow openings between trunks, like checking in with an old friend who never stops talking but always has something worthwhile to say. The trees begin to thin, and the light brightens into a wide band that makes you squint after the green-filtered dimness. The walkway slopes gently downward until the poles end where earth takes over, packed firm by countless bare soles. You step off and feel the soil's cool density under your weight, speckled with tiny shells and bits of worn, rounded stone. A few meters ahead, the river slides past, a broad, patient presence, bronze green again, but different here, closer, more muscular. This is not the dreamy stretch you floated through at dawn. Here you can see the water's many moods at once, the slow swirl near the bank, where foam gathers in lazy loops, the darker, faster current farther out that pulls small branches downstream, the almost invisible seam where two flows meet and wrestle. Your hosts spread out along the bank with wordless purpose, and you realize you're watching them slip into a routine as natural to them as checking your phone is to you, Except this version doesn't drain batteries or fry your attention span. A man stands at the edge, feet planted apart, eyes half-lidded. He watches a patch of water where the surface alternately smooths and trembles. You follow his gaze and, after a moment, catch the faint flash of silver just beneath, a fish turning its side to some invisible signal. Your host shifts his weight, just slightly, as if answering. He doesn't move yet. He simply waits, counting something you can't see. You remember all the times you've stared at loading bars and spinning wheels, waiting for data to show up. This waiting is different. Here, the delay is not a bug, it's the whole point. Farther down, two women work together to anchor a net between poles driven into the riverbed. The net isn't the harsh synthetic tangle you're used to seeing in photographs. It's softer, a pale weave that seems to belong on land as much as in water. They let it bow with the current instead of fighting it, shaping it into a long, gentle pocket where anything drifting along will eventually pause. One ties knots with swift, practiced fingers, glancing occasionally at the far bank where a cluster of reeds leans in one direction. Wind, current, distant rain, she reads them all in a glance, like scrolling a feed made entirely of actual living information. Your attention is pulled to a series of faint horizontal marks on one of the trees near the shore. At first you think they're natural scars, the kind left by fallen branches or over-eager vines. But as you look closer, you see regularity, a ladder of pale bands circling the trunk, each a little higher or lower than the next. One of your hosts follows your gaze and rests a hand briefly on the highest mark before trailing their fingers down to the lowest. The gesture is clear enough. Water has been here, and here, and here. The river keeps its own calendar etched into bark instead of apps. Someone hands you a small woven basket, light but surprisingly sturdy. Inside there's a neat little bundle of cord, a few sharpened sticks, and a strip of leaf wrapped tightly around something soft. You unwrap it to find bait, small, pale pieces of something that smells sharp and promising, at least from a fish's point of view. You are not, in your normal life, the person who holds cold, slippery fragments of anything on purpose, yet here you are doing exactly that while the river slides by with zero concern for your comfort zone. Your host leads you to a calmer bend where the water is shallower and clearer. They squat easily, gesture for you to do the same, and point to the surface. It takes a while, but eventually you see them. Thin shadows, barely there, flickering near submerged roots. Small fish moving in tiny bursts, as if each second is an independent decision. You extend a hand with the bait toward the water, feeling absurdly clumsy and enormous. The surface dimples around your fingers as a cooler chill climbs your wrist. Nothing happens at first. The fish keep their distance, unimpressed with your offering. Your instinct is to wiggle the bait, to do something, anything, to speed up results. Instead, you catch the steady rhythm of your host beside you. Their breathing is slow, shoulders resting, attention wide open rather than narrowed into effort. You match them as best you can, easing the tension in your hand, letting the bait hang almost motionless. Time stretches. Your thoughts, faced with the impossibility of productive multitasking, go quiet in self-defense. Then a shadow moves closer. Another follows. A tiny nibble brushes your fingertips, quick and startling. You resist the urge to jerk back, and after a brief silence, feel a stronger pull. Your host nudges your arm, and together You lift the bait with a smooth, unhurried motion. Water breaks, droplets scattering light, and a small, wriggling flash is transferred to a shallow basket with almost comical ease. It's not a heroic catch. It's one piece of a meal that will be made from many such small, patient successes. Throughout the morning, you watch variations on this theme repeat. Nets are checked and emptied. Traps woven from reeds are lifted from near the bank, revealing eels and curious crustaceans, their movements slow and resigned. Someone wades into deeper water with a long spear, not hurling it with cinematic flair, but easing it forward with meticulous control, striking only when the river's shifting patterns confirm what their muscles already know. The river is pantry, yes, but it's also textbook and teacher and stern but fair parent, rewarding attention and punishing arrogance. You notice how often your hosts look up from the water to the sky, then back to the trees, then to the opposite bank. Clouds stack and thin, birds move in or out. The smell of the air changes by an amount so slight you're not sure you'd have noticed it on your own. They adjust nets, shift boats, alter their footing by a step or two. Everything is a conversation, nothing one-sided. Your world trains you to ignore background noise. Theirs depends on the ability to hear it. By the time the sun climbs higher, the baskets are less empty. Fish lie still in neat rows, eyes clouding, silver scales dulled by air. Shells clack softly against one another in their own woven prison. Your hands smell faintly of river and bait and something mineral, like coins left in water too long. It's not exactly pleasant, but it is undeniably real, a sensory receipt for your participation. You have tugged, however slightly, on the same threads that keep this settlement fed, and the weight of that settles into your chest with a quiet, grounding certainty. As the group turns back toward the elevated paths, carrying their catch with the calm efficiency of people for whom lunch is non-negotiable, you glance once more at the water. In the shifting reflections you see the canopy, your own faint silhouette, the pale scars on the tree that mark floods past. The river holds it all, archive and current event in one restless body. You follow your hosts away from the bank, feeling as if you've just finished reading a long, complicated story in a language you barely know, yet somehow understand in your bones. The path back from the river winds upward, each step lifting you from the cool, shifting edge of water toward the warm, steady heart of the settlement. Baskets bump gently against hips. Nets drip in thin streams that leave dark freckles on the soil, and the smells begin to change. The river's mineral chill fades behind you, replaced by smoke, roasted something, and the faint, comforting sourness of fermented food resting somewhere just out of sight. You arrive at a central space that you somehow didn't fully register before, even though you walked past it earlier. It's like those corners of your own mind you only notice when you slow down, always there, quietly waiting. The communal hearth sits in a shallow circular pit, ringed with darkened stones and worn logs polished by countless bodies. Above it, a simple frame of sticks supports a blackened pot, and nearby a flat stone rests on low supports, its surface char-marked and glossy from long use. Smoke climbs in slow blue ribbons through a gap in the leaves overhead, painting its own gentle axis through the day. Your hosts set down the baskets in a small cluster near the fire, each one placed with care. There is no clatter, no careless dump of contents. Fish are lifted out one by one, laid in careful rows on a woven mat. Shells are grouped together. The river's gift is sorted with the quiet focus of people who know that nothing appears on a plate by magic. You watch as blood, scales, and guts are separated from flesh, each part directed somewhere specific, into a clay bowl, onto a waiting leaf, back to the fire, into the earth. Here, even leftovers have purpose. The idea of a trash bin feels suddenly ridiculous, like a strange, sad shrine to not paying attention. You're guided to sit on one of the low logs near the hearth. It gives a little under your weight, warmed by the fire and by the accumulated heat of so many evenings spent exactly like this. The air closest to the flame is hot and dry. A step back, it cools and thickens, carrying the smell of wood smoke braided with something herbal. A breeze slips through at just the right moment, brushing smoke away from your face as if the forest has decided you've coughed enough for one lifetime. Someone hands you a broad, dark leaf, glossy and thick, folded into a shallow bowl. This is your plate, both light and sturdy, veined like a tiny map. You turn it over in your hands for a moment, noticing how perfectly it fits the curve of your palm. No logos, no printed expiry date, no future as microplastics. It existed as itself a short time ago and will return to itself soon after. And there's something oddly soothing about being part of that simple timeline. The fish you helped catch, well, helped is generous, but you were at least present, are cleaned and laid over the flat stone near the hottest embers. A hand you don't see adds crushed leaves and something that smells sharp and citrusy. The heat makes the fish skin pucker, then crackle, beads of fat forming and slipping down in slow, glistening lines. The sound is gentle but relentless, like a tiny applause that never quite ends. Your stomach responds in a way that is both mildly embarrassing and completely understandable. Other dishes appear as if they've been waiting just at the edge of your awareness. A thick, steaming mash made from tubers you don't recognize, pale and faintly sweet. Leafy greens cooked down until they glisten, then brightened with something smoky and tangy. A small dish of ground seeds, nutty and fragrant, to be sprinkled like generous punctuation marks across everything else. Each item is transferred to leaves, shared out in measured portions, not weighed or calculated, just instinctively balanced so everyone receives enough. You notice how the fire itself is treated less like a tool and more like a trusted coworker. Wood is added in small, deliberate pieces, not piled recklessly. Ash is brushed aside with a twist of stick rather than kicked. No one stares into the flames with the distracted, vacant gaze you know from nights spent scrolling. Their attention flows between embers, food, and each other in a way that makes the whole space feel like a single breathing organism. When food is placed on your leaf, it arrives in thoughtfully layered sections. A piece of fish resting on the mash, greens folded along one side, a small pinch of seeds sprinkled over the top, and a wedge of something bright and juicy that leaves your fingertips sticky. You hesitate for a heartbeat, waiting for instructions, etiquette guidelines, maybe a helpful infographic. None arrives. Instead, you watch subtle cues. A hand pressing mash and fish together before lifting it to the mouth, a leaf folded just so to keep juices from spilling, a brief glance at the fire before taking the first bite, as if acknowledging the silent coworker in the center. You imitate as best you can. The fish is soft, almost buttery, with a whisper of smoke and the faint sharpness of whatever leaf was crushed onto it. The mash grounds it, heavy and comforting, while the greens bring a bright, bitter edge that keeps your taste buds awake. The seed sprinkle adds tiny bursts of crunch. It's not restaurant-plated, not curated for photos, and yet somehow it's more carefully designed than half the meals you've rushed through while staring at a screen. Forest etiquette reveals itself in small, repeated moments. Bones are not left scattered. They are piled on a specific leaf near the fire, later to be returned to the flames or to the earth. Spilled bits are not stomped into the soil. They are gently scooped and placed where animals or insects might find them. Water skins are passed around in a loose, reliable pattern. Everyone drinks, and no one lingers too long. You realize you have yet to see anything resembling the mindless, crumpled pile of wrappers that often accompanies your own late-night snacks. Here, each object moves along a path as intentional as the river's embrace of a fallen branch. You also notice how your hosts treat your awkwardness. They do not fuss over it or perform hospitality in the way you're used to, with endless reassurances and over-explanations. They simply make a little extra space around your clumsy movements. A basket is nudged closer to your reach. A log is shifted so you don't have to stretch too far toward the fire. When you almost drop a piece of fish, a leaf appears beneath your hands before it can fall, and your mistake disappears into the flow of the meal, absorbed like a small stone into a wide riverbed. Slowly, the noise in your head fades under the steady rhythm of eating. Your worries, so loud when you climbed into the canoe at dawn, now feel oddly distant, like a radio station drifting out of range. Each bite pulls your attention back to immediate, tangible things, the warmth of food in your stomach, the slight sting where steam touches your lips, the rough fiber of the leaf plate under your thumb. The world has been temporarily reduced to one fire, one circle of bodies, one shared effort to transform what the river gave into strength. When the meal thins toward its end, the etiquette shifts again. Hands are wiped on specific leaves, which are then folded and placed aside. Ash is gathered in a deliberate way, redistributed to cool patches of earth as if returning concentrated heat to places that need it. Leftover food is handled almost tenderly, some wrapped for later, some offered to the fire with a quiet, unspoken understanding that giving back is part of taking. The idea of waste feels more and more like a language error, an imprecise word for a choice you don't actually have to make. By the time the fire has settled into a warm, steady glow, your body feels heavier and quieter, like a piece of wood that has finally stopped floating and found a place to rest. Your hosts rise and move away from the hearth in small groups, returning to tasks that fit naturally around this glowing center. You sit a little longer, letting the warmth soak into your skin, learning, without being taught, that in this place every ember, every scrap, every breath has a place to land. The afternoon settles into that soft, heavy stretch where your body would normally start bargaining for caffeine. Here, instead of reaching for a cup, you find yourself following the quiet figure of the settlement's healer away from the hearth and back toward the shade of the trees. Your stomach is pleasantly weighted with fish and roots. Your limbs are loose, and a small, stubborn part of your brain that's still on productivity mode complains faintly that going for a slow walk doesn't count as doing anything. The forest disagrees. You step off the main walkway onto a narrower path, more suggestion than construction. It winds between trunks and around fallen logs, then slips into a faint tunnel of green where branches lean overhead and vines droop just low enough that you duck on instinct. The air here is cooler but thicker, full of layered scents that have nothing to do with perfume, yet feel oddly luxurious. Crushed leaves, wet bark, faint floral sweetness, the sharp edge of something resinous. It's like walking through a pharmacy where the labels have all been replaced with moss. The healer moves with the unhurried certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime reading this living archive. Their gaze runs along trunks, dips to the undergrowth, flicks up to the canopy. You begin to see what they are seeing, or at least you catch up to the idea that not all leaves are just green stuff. Colors separate themselves into subtle families, glossy deep greens that shine even in shadow, dusty blue-greens that seem to absorb light. New leaves so bright they almost glow, old ones browned at the edges like pages in a book. You pause beside a shrub whose leaves are long and narrow, dotted with tiny pale spots. When you brush your fingertips along one, a smell releases, sharp, almost citrusy, with a faint bitterness underneath. Your nose twitches. Your healer host snaps a leaf cleanly and rolls it between their fingers, then presses the crushed interior gently against the inside of your wrist. Coolness spreads first, then a tingling warmth, as if your skin is remembering that it has nerve endings and would like to report in. You think of the sticky creams and antiseptic wipes back home, how they come wrapped in layers of plastic and printed reassurance. Here, the reassurance is delivered via chlorophyll and chemistry you can't name, but your skin clearly recognizes. A little farther along, you brush against a low branch and feel a thin sting across your forearm. When you glance down, a narrow red line is forming, beading with small points of blood. It's nothing dramatic, just enough to make you wince and mutter something mentally unrepeatable. You could ignore it and add it to your collection of minor life annoyances, but the healer has already noticed. They guide you to a tree whose bark is patterned in vertical strips, pale and flaky. With a practiced hand, they lift a small ribbon of bark, exposing a smooth, damp layer underneath. The scent is woody and faintly sweet. A bit of the inner bark is scraped into a leaf, crushed with the heel of a palm, and pressed into a soft, fragrant paste. This is layered gently along your scratch, covered with another leaf, and secured with a thin strip of fiber that somehow knows exactly how tight it needs to be. Not enough to cut circulation, enough to signal that the injury has entered the system and is being processed. The sting fades to a dull warmth, then to almost nothing. You've been patched by a tree. Congratulations. You are now partially held together by bark, which is still probably healthier than whatever held you together last week. The path narrows further, threading between buttress roots that rise like frozen waves. In their shade, plants cluster in dense carpets. Some have tiny, rounded leaves that gleam like polished coins. Others send up tall, slender stalks topped with clusters of flowers so small you'd miss them at a glance. The healer points out patterns you wouldn't have noticed. This plant repeats near water and is used for fevers. That vine clings to shade and is turned into a drink for sore throats. These broad leaves, sticky to the touch, are for drawing heat out of swollen joints. An entire syllabus of bodily problems and their solutions arranged in gradients of green. You start to understand that this pharmacy is not an emergency room where people arrive in crisis and leave with pills. It's a constant background relationship woven into daily life. As you walk, you spot evidence of this everywhere. A small bundle of drying roots hanging from a branch, leaves laid out flat on a woven mat to crisp in the filtered sun, strips of bark tied in neat coils and stacked on a platform. Medicine isn't separate from life here. It's just another category of preparation, like keeping firewood dry or nets in good repair. The healer pauses beside a plant whose leaves are velvety, almost silver underneath, catching what little light slips through. They rub a leaf between fingers, then bring their hand close to your face. You catch the smell, calm, almost sweet, with a depth that settles directly into your chest. You inhale once, then again, slower this time. The knot of tension that usually lives somewhere between your ribs and your spine loosens by a fraction. You didn't even realize how tightly you were holding yourself together until this small, fragrant reminder that softening is an option. Not all the medicine here is meant for bodies. Some of it is clearly for minds tangled in knots. You notice a cleared space ringed with smooth stones, each one daubed with faded pigment. At the center, a small bundle of dried herbs sits in a clay bowl, its stems bound with fibers. When the healer ignites a corner with an ember carried in a shell, a thin smoke rises, darker, richer than cooking smoke, with a grounding, almost earthy sweetness. It curls around your face, clinging briefly to your hair and clothes, as if the forest is gently overriding the smell of your other life. You feel a strange humming quiet inside your skull, like the mental equivalent of turning down a too bright screen. The healer's movements through this space are both practical and reverent. They gather only a few leaves from each plant, never stripping any bare. Bark is taken in narrow strips, leaving plenty intact. Roots, when needed, are harvested from plants that are then replanted or whose seeds are scattered nearby. You think of your own tendency to buy more than you need, use less than you intend, and throw away more than you admit. Here, the idea of stocking up just in case would look like theft from your future self. At one point, the healer pauses and listens, head tilted. You follow suit, ears straining. At first, you hear only the usual forest soundscape, insect drones, occasional bird calls, the faint murmur of distant water. Then you catch it, a small shift in tone, like the air itself has changed key. A gust of damper, cooler air rushes past, brushing your skin. Somewhere upstream, rain is beginning. No one panics. This is data, not disaster. A small pouch appears from the healer's belt, woven tight and bulging slightly. Inside are pre-dried leaves, bits of bark, and tiny seeds. A traveling kit, you realize. An emergency shelf of remedies condensed into something that can hang from a waist. You have your own version of this back home. Painkillers, Band-Aids, anxiety snacks. But this pouch hums with a different kind of logic. It's not stocked in case the world breaks. It's carried in recognition that the world is constantly moving, and bodies move with it. By the time you circle back toward the settlement, your scratch is no longer visible under its leaf bandage. Your lungs feel rinsed by the herb scents, and your mind has quietly, astonishingly downgraded half of its internal problems from urgent crisis to maybe not that serious. You've walked through a living index of care where every leaf and strip of bark represents an agreement. If the forest is watched, listened to, and treated with restraint, it will, more often than not, answer when help is needed. You step out of the dappled shade into the clearer light near the houses, carrying a faint halo of plant smells on your skin. For once, you don't smell of exhaustion and recycled air. You smell like you've spent an afternoon inside a very patient, green library that decided you were overdue for renewal. Later, when the sun has tilted just enough to turn shadows longer and the air feels like it is exhaled a little, you find yourself drifting toward a different kind of work. One that doesn't involve nets or bark or herbs, but threads, colors, and bare skin. The same way your eyes were drawn to the river and then to the healer's bundle of plants, they're now pulled toward a cluster of people sitting beneath a broad, low roof where light filters in through woven walls and turns everything it touches into soft, shifting patterns. This is where the village's hands translate the forest into objects, baskets, bands, cloth, and marks that live directly on the body. The space hums with quiet activity. No one rushes, yet nothing is still. Fingers move in small, quick motions, twisting, knotting, pulling, smoothing. Piles of raw fibers lie in loose heaps. Pale strands stripped from palm fronds, stronger cords peeled from vines, wispy tufts from seed pods that look too delicate to be useful until you see them spun into tight, resilient thread. You sit near the edge at first, unsure of where to place yourself in this slow choreography. The floor is a firm, cool platform of woven wood, patterned from years of use. Sunlight slants in and breaks into bands across the space, turning dust and fiber fluff into drifting halos. Tools are simple and few, a smoothed bone here, a polished stick there, a shell used as a small, shallow bowl for pigments. The absence of clutter makes your own life's overflowing drawers feel suddenly absurd, like you've been hoarding instructions you never really use. One artisan, an older woman with arms crisscrossed by faded patterns, draws a handful of fibers through her fingers. She twists them together without even looking, adding new strands as the cord lengthens. The motion is hypnotic. Pinch, twist, roll, pull. Over and over, the fibers tightening under her touch into something that could bear weight, hold shape, resist time. It's hard not to think of all the invisible threads in your own existence. Messages, expectations, deadlines, twisted together into something just as real, though far less pleasant to hold. Nearby, a wide, flat frame is propped against a post, anchored with cords tied in vertical lines. A younger pair of hands moves a shuttle of sorts, really just a smoothed piece of wood over and under along the frame, passing dyed fibers through the warp. With each pass, a pattern emerges, triangles stacked on each other, zigzags echoing the jagged lines of distant thunder, repeating diamonds that look suspiciously like the shimmer of fish scales when the river rolls them sideways. You lean in, and the pattern sharpens into meaning. The triangles expand and contract like rising and falling water levels, a quiet nod to the marks you saw scarred into the riverbank trees. The zigzags carry the rhythm of storms. The diamonds hold the memory of nets pulled heavy with wriggling silver. This is not decoration for decoration's sake. It is a wearable archive, a visual shorthand for the stories that already live in this place. Floods endured, seasons counted, harvests taken and shared. Without ceremony, a bundle of undyed fibers is placed near your knees. Your hands understand the invitation before your mind fully catches up. You pick up a few strands and attempt to twist them as you watch the elder do. The fibers initially resist, slipping and fraying between your fingers as if testing your seriousness. You adjust your grip, slow down, and let your fingertips listen. Pinch, twist, roll, pull. The first attempt is lumpy and inconsistent, but it holds. You're making a thread out of almost nothing, and somehow that feels like proof that you are not entirely useless without electronics. Across the space, pigments wait in shallow bowls, powdered charcoal black, earthy red from clay, rusty brown that smells faintly metallic, yellow made from crushed seeds, a soft green drawn from leaves. Each color is alive in its own way, nothing like the flat, manufactured shades you know. These pigments stain fingers, cling to skin, refuse to be fully washed away by a single rinse. They're reminders, long after the pattern is finished, that something real passed through these hands. You realize the painted designs you saw earlier are not just isolated flourishes, they're part of a system as deliberate as any language you've ever studied. Lines across the cheeks might mark initiations or roles. Bands around the arms could trace family connections or skills. Spirals near the shoulders may echo winds, river eddies, or paths of migration. You don't have a key to this code, but you can sense its structure, the way you can sense grammar in a language you don't yet speak. A small clay bowl filled with thick, dark pigment is set beside you. The smell is earthy with a smoky undercurrent. A thin stick, its tip wrapped in fiber, rests on the bowl's edge. You've spent years letting keyboards and screens record who you are, but now the recording tool feels almost laughably simple. A stick, some plant and mineral, and skin. Someone gestures toward your forearm, where the healer's leaf bandage once sat, and then to the bowl. The message is easy enough to read. The canvas is you. You extend your arm, palm upward. The first touch of the pigment-loaded tip is cool and damp, a slight drag across your skin. A line forms, not straight, but gently curved, following the natural shape of your muscles. Another line branches from it, then another, forming a pattern that feels strangely familiar as you see it for the first time. Triangles, like those in the woven cloth, appear near your wrist, stacked like the steps of rising water. A repeated set of smaller lines follows the curve of your radius, echoing river ripples. Near the crook of your elbow, a simple diamond anchors the whole design, holding everything together in a quiet center. You don't know what this map says in their language, but you understand what it means in yours. It captures the path you've walked today: river, village, healer, forest. It records the way you opened your hands to the settlement and had them filled with food, medicine, tasks, quiet tolerance of your awkwardness. The pigment sits dark against your skin, drying into a matte finish that feels like a temporary tattoo and a permanent reminder at once. Around you, other designs are being drawn and refreshed, layered over older, faded patterns. This is not about a single static image of identity. It's about updates, versions, iterations. Where you're from, you edit your profiles and change your profile picture. Here, they add a new line, deepen a color, slightly alter a pattern to reflect a shift in role, season, or story. Bodies become walking narratives, constantly revised, but always rooted in the same underlying threads. As the afternoon light continues to thin, the space fills with a subtle shift in energy. Finished cords are coiled, woven pieces are set aside to dry or wear, pigments are covered to keep them from drying out too fast. Your own painted arm feels oddly steady, as if the lines have anchored you to something larger than yourself. You came here carrying invisible symbols of your world, brand logos on fabric, timestamps on messages, unread counts in tiny red circles. Now, for once, the marks you wear are made of earth and plant and intention, not algorithms. When you finally rise and step back into the open space between houses, the faint weight of pigment on your skin and the memory of fibers between your fingers stay with you. You are carrying a little piece of the settlement's language on your body now, whether or not you ever fully learn how to read it. The forest watches you emerge, sun low and gold behind the canopy, and you realize that line by line, pattern by pattern, this place has begun writing itself into you. By the time the sky begins to thin from bright gold to a soft, bruised violet, the settlement's movements change. Tasks taper off, motion slow, and everything seems to lean subtly toward a single direction deeper in the forest. You sense it before you're actually guided there, the way you sense the pull of sleep before you've decided to go to bed. You follow a small group along a path you haven't taken yet, your painted arm moving in and out of shadow. The pigment has dried now, matte and velvety, even more a part of you than before. Each step presses faint prints into the earth, your tread softer than it was this morning, as if your body has finally understood the assignment. Less stomping, more listening. The forest ahead opens gradually, not in a dramatic clearing, but in a gentle widening where the density of trunks eases. In the center of that space, the ceiba tree rises. You've seen large trees today, but this one rearranges your internal scale. Its trunk is massive, flaring at the base into buttress roots that stretch outward like giant petrified wings. The bark is pale and rough, streaked with faint vertical scars that catch the last light, turning them into silver threads. Vines hang from the lower branches, but higher up the trunk clears and surges straight toward the canopy, where its crown spreads in a dark, layered cloud. You feel small here in a way that is strangely soothing. In most of your life, being small feels like failure, not loud enough, not important enough, not caught up enough with whatever invisible race everyone seems to be running. Beneath the ceiba, smallness is not a judgment, just an observable fact. You are one breathing, blinking creature at the base of something that has been alive longer than your entire family history. You're not meant to compete, you're meant to fit. Villagers gather round the tree in a wide, loose circle. Children settle near the roots, their shoulders leaning against the cool, fluted wood. Adults take their places with unhurried certainty, some sitting cross-legged, others kneeling or standing, hands resting on thighs. A few carry small objects, bundles of dried leaves, shallow bowls, a rattle made from a hollow gourd threaded with seeds. No one rushes to start anything. The evening itself does the opening, dimming the light, turning bird calls from sharp midday cries into softer, questioning notes. You find a place near one of the enormous buttress roots. Its surface is smooth in some places, ridged in others, cool where the heat of the day has finally begun to leach away. When you lean your back against it, your whole spine seems to line up with the tree's vertical insistence. The ground beneath you is firm but forgiving, cushioned with fallen leaves that have been crushed and layered into a soft, faintly fragrant mat. The air is changing again. Daytime's thick, heated scent gives way to something cooler, edged with the faint metallic tang that hints at dew. Distantly you hear the river shifting tone, its broad voice deepening as evening insects begin to sing over it. The first stars hesitate into view between the high leaves, tiny points of light caught in the complex lattice of branches. Night is not a curtain dropping here. It's a slow, patient steeping. A low sound begins, not quite a hum, not quite a chant, somewhere near the opposite side of the circle. It's a single tone at first, held steady in the chest, closer to a long exhale than a song. Another joins it, then another, each voice choosing a slightly different pitch. They slide together into a soft, shifting chord that sits low in the air, almost more vibration than sound. You feel it in your ribs before your ears fully process it, the way you feel distant thunder in your sternum. You let your breathing fall into step with that hum. Inhale slowly through your nose, tasting smoke and leaf and the faint sweetness of someone's dried fruit nearby. Exhale through your mouth, trying to let each breath last as long as the notes surrounding you. This is not a performance. No one is trying to be impressive or original. It's more like collective tuning, each person adjusting their internal metronome to the same slow tempo. At intervals, instruments join the soundscape. The seed-filled gourd rattles gently in an irregular pattern, mirroring the unpredictable rustle of leaves overhead. A hand drum somewhere at the back offers a soft, pulsing beat, not loud, just firm enough to remind you that your heart knows how to echo it. Sometimes the rhythm fades almost to nothing, leaving only the hum and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Other times it swells, warm and insistent, then eases again, like waves touching shore and slipping back. You close your eyes without consciously deciding to, and in that darkness, the seba's presence grows even larger. You imagine its roots reaching down through layers of soil, braided with older roots and stones, drinking from water you'll never see. You picture its trunk rising past bird nests and insect trails, past tangles of vine and moss, up into the open sky, where it watches sun, moon, and storm cycle in slow repetition. It is a vertical bridge between all the layers you've brushed against today: river, soil, leaf, smoke, star. Sitting here, pressed to its side, you feel embarrassingly unimportant and deeply, deeply held. The healer's plant smoke from earlier in the day seems to linger in your memory, and you catch a faint echo of it now. Dried herbs burn in a small bowl near the base of the tree, their smoke drifting upward along the trunk before dissolving into the night. The scent is grounding, earthy, but with a thread of brightness, like the forest is exhaling through carefully chosen lungs. The smoke curls around the circle in invisible ribbons, landing on hair, skin, clothing, and somewhere beneath all of that, on the restless parts of your mind. Your painted arm rests loosely across your lap, lines and shapes dim in the low light, but still present, a quiet constellation mapped onto your skin. The triangles near your wrist rise and fall with each breath. The diamond near your elbow feels like a small, steady anchor. You remember the river's flood scars on the tree trunks, the ladder of pale marks that recorded its highest reaches. The ceiba carries its own marks too, though they're subtler. Patches of lichen, faint gouges, places where bark has grown around old, now vanished vines. Everyone here, tree and human alike, are collections of remembered waters. Time loosens further. You lose track of how long the humming continues, where one pattern ends and another begins. At intervals, the drum grows quieter, then stops altogether, leaving behind a ringing silence that isn't empty. In that pause, you become acutely aware of smaller sounds, the nearly inaudible brush of fabric as someone shifts their weight, the tiny knock of a seed bouncing inside a gourd after the last shake, the subtle creak of the ceiba tree's branches overhead, responding to some distant, invisible breeze. Your own heartbeat, once hurried and irregular, has settled into something slow and predictable. It no longer pounds against your ribs like it's trying to escape. It sits there like an animal finally convinced the danger has passed. You are not checking anything, not calculating, not composing responses in your head. You are, for one rare stretch of time, synchronized with something older and larger than your to-do list. Eventually, the hum thins, individuals letting their voices trail off as their lungs ask for a break. No single person stops the gathering. It simply leans toward stillness. The circle remains intact, bodies lingering in various states of groundedness. Some heads rest back against the tree roots. Others bow forward, foreheads touching clasped hands. You find yourself somewhere in between, chin tilted slightly toward the sky, eyes half open, watching the stars negotiate with the canopy. The ceiba holds the quiet like a bowl. Above you, its branches frame patches of sky where the first real darkness of night has settled. The day has officially tipped over into the realm of dreams and soft edges, and you're perched exactly at the hinge. Wrapped in hum echo, smoke, and the faint pressure of sacred bark against your spine, you realize your own inner volume has finally turned down to something gentle. The forest no longer feels like a backdrop to your story. You feel like a small, welcome note in its endless, low song. Sometime between the last echo of the ceiba's humming and the first call of morning birds, sleep finally folds over you like a soft, leaf-scented blanket. When you drift back up again, the world is tinted pale and gentle. Light seeps through woven walls in thin stripes, painting your hammock in patterns that sway with every tiny movement. Your body protests a little as you sit up. Apparently it's not accustomed to actually resting, but the protest is half-hearted. It knows it lost that argument last night. Outside, the day feels freshly unwrapped. The air is cooler than it will be later, touched by the leftover softness of night. Smoke rises from a few early cooking fires in lazy spirals. People move quietly, voices low, as if the settlement is stretching its limbs rather than snapping awake. Your painted arm looks slightly different in this light, some edges softened, pigment sunk a little deeper into the skin, as if the design has slept too and decided to stay. A small group prepares to leave along a narrower path at the edge of the settlement. Their bundles are light, their steps unhurried, but there's a certain focus to their movements that catches your attention. You fall in with them almost automatically, your feet apparently having decided that mysterious morning walk beats lying in a hammock thinking about emails you're ignoring back home. No one needs to announce the destination. The path itself, half visible and half suggested, seems to carry its own intention. The trail slips quickly into denser growth, sidestepping the more familiar routes you've taken before. Trees crowd closer here, trunks thick and varied, smooth gray columns, rough barked towers, pale bowls marked with fungi like stacked shelves. The undergrowth is more insistent too, brushing your legs and whispering at your ankles with every step. Roots twist across the ground in looping ridges, forcing your body to stay awake, ankles flexing, knees bending, mind paying attention. This is not the kind of walk you could do while scrolling through anything. Those roots feel ancient in the way that old family stories feel ancient. Less about exact dates, more about deep repetition. Some lie exposed like ossified waves, others dive in and out of the soil in tangled braids. Your group steps among them with quiet familiarity, choosing routes that seem unlikely and then somehow perfectly sensible. If you tried this alone, you would absolutely become a cautionary podcast episode. Here, though, you simply place your feet where theirs have already tested the ground. The light dims as the canopy thickens, but it isn't unfriendly. Sunlight arrives in small, bright pools where it finds gaps, illuminating patches of moss and leaves as if spotlighting tiny, important thoughts. The air grows more humid, even compared to yesterday, clinging to your skin in a warm, damp embrace. Somewhere far off, you think you hear the low murmur of thunder, but it's so distant it could be your imagination or the forest clearing its throat. Either way, it's filed away in your mind with the same quiet attention you saw in your hosts when they glanced at clouds above the river. As you walk, occasional markers flicker at the edge of your vision. A feather tied to a root, a small coil of vine around a branch, a cluster of stones arranged in an almost too neat triangle. Nothing obvious, nothing screaming for attention, yet collectively they whisper, "This is not random. People pass here, often." The forest may overlay everything with its own chaotic handwriting, but beneath it there's a human script you're only just beginning to notice. The ground lifts gradually. You don't realize you've been climbing until your legs start to protest and your breath lengthens again. The air changes subtly, less river-scented, more mineral, as if stone is waiting just beneath the surface. Your hosts adjust their pace, giving you time to keep up without making a spectacle of your softer indoor muscles. You manage, mostly. It helps that your brain is too busy watching every root and stone to complain about how many steps you've done. Then, with almost no warning, the dense growth lightens. Trees step back, vines thin. You emerge into a clearing that doesn't feel like the others. Not the practical openness near the hearth, not the living bowl beneath the ceiba. This space carries a different kind of attention, quieter, heavier, as if the air itself remembers something. Stone greets you first, not the casual scatter of rocks, but deliberate shapes. Low circles of stones, each about knee-high, emerge from the moss like the rims of ancient wells. Within each circle, the ground is slightly sunken, filled with softer greenery, ferns and tiny plants that seem to prefer this specific cradle. The stones themselves are a mottled gray, their surfaces softened by time and carpeted in moss that glows a deep velvety green in the filtered light. You walk closer and realize these circles are not perfect, ruler-straight constructions. They wobble slightly, following the contours of the earth, adjusting to roots and the occasional stubborn boulder too big to move. Yet they're undeniably intentional. This is not random geology. Someone, a very long time ago, hauled these stones into place one by one with a patience you can barely muster for a software update. On some stones, the moss is interrupted by faint carvings, shallow grooves, spirals, and repeated lines. You kneel to peer closer. A curve here echoes the arc of your own painted patterns. A cluster of short parallel lines looks suspiciously like stylized rain or river ripples or both. A simple cross shape could be a star, or the point where paths meet, or some meaning that doesn't translate cleanly into any of your worn-out metaphors. Whatever these marks meant originally, they have outlived those who made them, weathering rain, heat, vines, and creeping moss with stubborn persistence. You glance up and realize the circles are not isolated. They sit in a loose arrangement, some nearer the center of the clearing, others tucked closer to the surrounding trees. If you squint and let your eyes soften, connections appear, lines of sight that align with distant gaps in the canopy, arcs that seem to mirror the curve of the river's bend far below, clusters that echo constellations you once learned in the book and promptly forgot. This place is both map and memory, drawn in stone instead of ink. Your hosts move through the clearing with quiet familiarity. One lays a hand briefly on a stone as they pass, fingertips resting in a carved groove as if greeting an old acquaintance. Another clears a few fallen leaves from the inner ring of a circle, not with reverent theatrics, but with the same calm care you've seen applied to nets, fires, and herbs. To them, these are not relics from a vanished culture. They are part of the current one, even if their original builders now exist only as stories and genetic echoes. You stand inside one of the circles, just at its edge. The stone lightly presses against your calves, cool and slightly damp through the moss. Inside the ring, the air feels marginally different, as if the boundary shifts the way sound carries, or how your breath lands in your chest. It might be nothing more than suggestion. It might be years of human focus slowly soaking into this patch of ground. Either way, your mind responds by going very still. In your regular life, you like to pretend that history is mostly about dates in books, museums far away, or documentaries you plan to watch someday. Here, history is rock, under your feet, wrapped in moss that continues to grow whether anyone looks at it or not. This settlement is not a temporary camp hurriedly scratched into the present. It sits on layers, generations of people who stood exactly where you stand, hands perhaps marked in patterns like the ones on your arm, eyes also turned up to track whatever the sky was doing that day. A soft breath of wind brushes the clearing, pushing through leaves and sliding across stone. For a moment, the only sounds are insects in your own breathing. Then, faintly, you hear the river again, far below and out of sight, its voice muffled by distance, but unmistakable. The stone circles, the ceiba, the marks on the flood-scarred trees, the healer's plants, the patterns on skin, it all links back to that moving line of water. The settlement doesn't just sit in the forest, it sits on a timeline shaped by rises and falls, storms and calms, days and nights stacked into centuries. You run your fingers lightly over one of the carved symbols, feeling the tiny dips and ridges. You don't decode it, not really, but your body seems to understand the important part. You are walking through a story that did not begin with you and will not end when you leave. For once, that realization doesn't trigger your anxiety about being replaceable. It feels instead like a relief, like setting down a heavy bag you were never meant to carry alone. When your group eventually turns back toward the denser growth, leaving the circles in their quiet watch, you hesitate for just a heartbeat at the edge of the clearing. The stone's coolness clings faintly to your skin, the moss's softness still pressed into memory. Then you step once more into the tangle of roots and vines, carrying with you the awareness that this place has been paying attention far longer than your own attention span has existed, and somehow, incredibly, it has made room for you in its ongoing moss-softened epic. By the time you return from the stone circles, the day has shifted almost imperceptibly into a new mood. The light is still strong, but it's turned flatter, less golden, like someone has quietly lowered the contrast on the world. The forest feels thicker on the way back, not because the roots have moved, but because the air holds an extra weight it didn't have this morning. Your skin notices before your mind does. The fine hairs on your arms lift, sending a small, instinctive signal up your spine. Back in the settlement, life continues, but with a subtle edge. Nets are checked with a little more urgency. A bundle of firewood is carried under shelter instead of left near the open hearth. Children's games stay closer to the houses, their laughter shorter, glances darting more often toward the river. No one announces a change. The forest does that job, rolling a low rumble across the distant sky that feels less like a threat and more like a warning cough. You look up through the breaks in the canopy and see them, clouds stacking on the horizon, dark at the base, lighter at the top, building themselves into slow-moving mountains. They advance in layers, swallowing patches of blue as they come. You've watched storms roll in from office windows and bus seats, seen them reflected on screens and in sidewalks. But here, the scale is different. These clouds are not a mood. They are infrastructure, as real and consequential as any dam, any bridge. The painted patterns on your arm, those little triangles of rising water, catch your eye. For a moment, they feel less like art and more like fine print. You remember the pale horizontal scars on the trunks by the river, the healer's quick glance at the sky when distant rains scented the air. All day, the settlement has been quietly tracking a conversation between water and sky that you're only just beginning to overhear. Now, apparently, that conversation is about to get loud. A wind stirs, stronger than the gentle afternoon breezes you've gotten used to. It comes from upriver, tugging at leaves, sending loose strands of hair across faces, and lifting the corners of thatched roofs. The air temperature drops by a degree or two, barely anything, yet your body registers it immediately. Your skin, recently wrapped in warm humidity like a permanent blanket, suddenly feels exposed, as if the world has opened a window. You make your way toward the river almost without deciding to, along with several others. The path feels shorter this time, your feet remembering the route from earlier. As you emerge onto the bank, you see it, the river, newly restless. The surface, which spent the morning sliding by in smooth, patient planes, is now chopped into short, overlapping waves. The water's color has deepened from bronze green to something murkier, streaked with pale foam and tumbling patches of debris, twigs, leaves, a branch that spins slowly in the current. The marks on the nearest tree loom at the edge of your vision, those pale horizontal bands that recorded previous high waters. This morning they felt like old stories. Now they read like a to-do list written by the river itself. You follow them up the trunk, ladders of memory climbing past your shoulder, your eye level, the height of your outstretched hand. The lowest marks are still well above the current line. That should be comforting. Somehow it isn't. Rain arrives not as a delicate suggestion, but as a decision. One moment the air is merely humid, the next it breaks into countless bright impacts on leaves, roofs, and water. The first drops are large, warm, almost playful. Then the sky commits. Sheets of rain sweep across the river, turning its surface into a churning, pocked expanse. Sound multiplies, drumming on thatch, hissing through leaves, hammering onto the water with relentless energy. The forest, which usually hums along with its own layered soundtrack, goes quiet for a moment, as if listening too. You retreat under a raised walkway, joining others in the dry rectangle beneath the houses. From here, you have a clear view of the river's edge, where the bank begins to blur. Water creeps higher in small spurts, swallowing the lowest roots, undermining clumps of soil that crumble and slide away. The logs that serve as a landing for canoes shift slightly, bumping against their moorings. The air is thick with petrogor, the smell of rain on soil, multiplied by an entire rainforest's worth of surface area. It's overwhelming, almost intoxicating, and somewhere under it you catch the faint metallic hint of unease. Time compresses and stretches by turns. You watch leaves bow under the weight of water, dumping their burden in sudden cascades before filling again. The clouds above stack higher now, their undersides almost purple. Lightning forks somewhere distant, its flash muted by the foliage but still bright enough to etch a brief negative image into your vision. Thunder follows, low and long, a rolling reminder that this whole system is operating on a scale you'll never fully grasp. As the rain continues, the river's rise becomes more obvious. The marks on the tree become less abstract with each inch. Water reaches a root you recognize from this morning, a gnarled shape you brushed with your fingertips. Now it disappears under a thin, murky swirl. The calm eddies where small fish hovered earlier are gone, replaced by a uniform rush that doesn't seem interested in nuance. You feel something tighten deep in your chest, an old familiar clench you usually associate with missed deadlines or unread messages piling up. This is different, though. This isn't about you failing at some self-imposed task. It's about remembering, viscerally, that the ground beneath your imagined control is actually quite capable of rearranging itself without your permission. Around you, people move with a purpose that is calm but undeniably sharper. Baskets are lifted to higher platforms. Tools are shifted under more solid roofs. A canoe is pulled further up the bank, its hull scraping damp soil. A child's toy, one of those braided palm frond birds, is scooped up from the edge of a walkway where it could easily be swept away. There's no frantic running, no panicked flailing. The settlement has clearly practiced for this. Still, beneath the practiced motions, you can feel it. That thin, bright thread of worry tightening through the group. Your mind flicks back to all the maps and timelines you've scrolled, the headlines you've skimmed about rising waters and shifting climates. Those were abstract, flattened by distance and repetition. Here, none of this is theoretical. Here, the river is a moving line, inches away from floors, hearths, sleeping spaces. The marks on the trees are not someone else's case study. They're the collective memory of where the line has reached before and how much higher it might choose to go. Rainwater begins to stream from the edges of roofs in thick curtains, pooling briefly before spilling over. Pathways that were dusty that morning become slick, mud forming in the low spots. The settlement's elevated design suddenly makes visceral sense. It is not quaint or picturesque, it's a negotiation, an agreement that says, you can come this far, river, and no farther. At least that's the hope. You catch sight of your painted arm again, dark lines glistening where raindrops have sneaked under the shelter and landed on your skin. The triangles of rising water stare back at you, now half blurred, as if the storm is editing your temporary map. You flex your fingers, feeling the skin pull slightly under the damp pigment, and realize your body is humming with a question it hasn't fully formed yet. What happens if that careful line between river and home doesn't hold this time? Thunder rolls again, closer now, the sound sliding through your bones like a low, sustained note from last night's gathering under the ceiba, except this tone carries an edge. The settlement stands in its path, not as an enemy, but as a stubborn, necessary complication, a cluster of lives arranged against and along the water's will. You watch the river climb another small step, and you understand with sudden, sobering clarity that the next hours will not just be an interesting weather experience. They will be a test of roots, of ropes, of memory, of how much a community can do when the line they live beside starts to move. The storm has fully taken the day now. Rain presses down in thick sheets, turning the space between canopy and ground into a single moving veil. The river hurls itself at the bank in dark, swollen surges, louder than last night's humming under the Seba, more urgent than any alarm you've ever slept through. The village feels tighter around you, not afraid exactly, but braced. Changes start small. Sleeping mats are rolled and stacked higher. Baskets shift further from the edge of the walkways. A canoe is dragged another body length up the muddy slope. These adjustments ripple outward until they reach you. A coil of rope is placed in your hands, already heavy with water, and a simple tilt of a chin sends you toward the river. The message is clear: help hold the line. You step from the shelter into the storm, and it closes over you at once. Rain smacks your skin, finds the back of your neck, runs in cold lines down your spine before warming against your body. Within seconds, your clothes cling and your hair sticks to your forehead. The ground has turned into a shallow soup of clay and water. Each step pulls at your feet like hands trying to keep you in place. Roots you trusted this morning are slick and uncertain, so you lower your center of gravity, copying the villagers' easy, wide stance. Down at the landing, the river looks bigger without actually being wider. Its surface is no longer a slow, bronze sheet, but a churning, muscle-thick flow flecked with foam and broken branches. The logs that make up the small dock jerk with each surge, mooring posts bowing under the strain. Ropes groan. If those posts give, the canoes and much of the village's movement disappear downstream in minutes. A stash of heavier logs waits further up the bank, half sunk in mud. You and several others heave the first one free. The bark is slick. Your shoulder slides when you try to brace against it. Mud oozes between your toes as you dig in. The log yields only a fraction, then a little more when two more bodies lean their weight with yours. Together you roll and drag it toward the landing, every step a small argument against gravity, clay, and exhaustion. At the river's edge, you wedge the log diagonally against an existing post. The whole structure shudders as another wave slams beneath it. Rope follows, rough against your softened palms. You wrap it around wood and hold, muscles shaking, while more practiced hands knot quickly and cleanly. The fibers bite your skin, swollen with water, but the pain is strangely reassuring. At least you know exactly why you hurt. The work falls into a rhythm. Brace, haul, knot. Shift along the dock. Brace, haul, knot again. Your universe shrinks to a few meters of wood, rope, and water. Rain becomes background noise, no more remarkable than your own breath. Your heart pounds in your chest, not with anxious, formless stress, but with the direct, simple demand of effort. For once, there is nothing else to think about, and nowhere else to be. When the landing feels less likely to bolt away, attention shifts to the houses closest to the river. Runoff is cutting quick channels through the soil, chewing at the bases of the nearest posts. You join a chain of people carrying bundles of brush, woven mats, and more logs, dropping them into the water's path to blunt and redirect its rush. Each trip up and down the slick incline adds a new layer of mud to your legs, until it looks like you're wearing lumpy clay boots. You are filthy, tired, and unexpectedly solidly useful. Between loads you catch a glimpse of the ceiba through the rain, pale trunk hazy but upright, its crown lost in moving gray. It stands exactly where it did last night, clearly uninterested in the storm's theatrics. That stubborn vertical comfort settles quietly into your spine. You adjust your grip on the next bundle and push through the sucking mud with a little more steadiness than you had a moment ago. The healer moves through the weather with the same unhurried focus you followed into the forest. Their pouch bumps at their hip as they check a torn heel here, a twisted ankle there, smearing leaf-scented paste over raw scrapes. When their gaze lands on you, you half expect to be waved back toward shelter. Instead, after a brief practical assessment of your shaking legs and still clear eyes, they move on. Your aching, indoor-trained body has been officially accepted as part of the response. A sharp call pulls every head upstream. A tree trunk, stripped from branches, has jammed itself against a curve in the river, forcing more of the current directly toward the village bank. Poles and more rope appear almost instantly, as if the storm itself has produced them. You move with the group along the edge, slipping once, catching yourself on a root, lungs burning in the wet, heavy air. The plan, as far as you can piece it together, is not to fight the trunk outright, but to persuade it. Poles jam into the riverbed near it, ropes loop around jagged knots of remaining wood. From where you stand on slightly higher ground, you help anchor those lines. On an unspoken cue, everyone leans. For a long breath, nothing moves but muscles and rain. Then the trunk twitches, just enough for the current to grab a new angle. You lean again, timing your effort with the surges slamming against your shins. The trunk pivots, slow and stubborn, until finally it tears free from its snag and lurches into the center of the river, carried away in the main rush. Pressure along your section of bank eases at once, like a long-held breath finally let go. No one cheers loudly, there isn't enough spare air for that, but a ragged, shared exhale passes along the line, more powerful than any shout. You stand there, chest heaving, rainwater pouring off your hair and nose, rope marks rising red across your palms. Your thighs shake, your shoulders burn, your lungs feel starched. But under all that noise, there is a deep, surprising quiet. Your hands, your weight, your unglamorous, mud-smeared body have helped keep this settlement stitched together for another hour. The river still runs high. The rain still falls in slanting curtains. The storm has not given up, but the landing holds. The canoes remain tied. The nearest posts stand behind their makeshift defenses of brush and wood. The line between river and home has been blurred, tested, and, for the moment, reinforced by rope, roots, and the determined work of many tired bodies, including yours. As you slog back toward the raised walkways, every step a small battle with the mud, you realize you no longer feel like a visitor politely observing a beautiful, fragile world. You are soaked, shaking, streaked with dirt, and probably developing a spectacular blister. You are also undeniably part of this particular story now, as much as the painted lines still clinging to your arm and the bark paste still faintly scenting your skin. The storm has no idea who you are, but the community does, and that quiet recognition glows inside your chest like an ember the rain cannot quite extinguish. At some point, the storm stops asking for your attention and simply takes it. The hours blur into a wet, gray tunnel of effort. You haul, brace, carry, anchor, your world reduced to the radius of your arms and the next sure place to put your feet. Eventually, even adrenaline runs out, leaving only the stubborn, low burn of muscles doing what they must. You lose track of how many ropes you've gripped, how many loads you've dragged. The river roars, the rain hammers, and then, somewhere on the far side of your own exhaustion, the sound begins, almost imperceptibly, to soften. The rain does not snap off like a switch, it thins. Sheets become bands, bands become streaks, roof edges drip instead of pour. The sky lightens from solid lead to a patchy, uncertain gray. The river still runs high, but its shoulders look less swollen, its rage less personal. Water that only surged forward now begins to slide, to regain the slow, heavy inevitability you first met at dawn. Someone presses a hand to your shoulder in passing, brief and steady, and you understand without words that, for the moment, the urgent phase is over. Your legs, which have been pretending to be tree trunks, suddenly remember that they are made of human material and wobble in protest. You retreat under the nearest raised shelter and sink onto a log, mud softening under you, rain tapping a slower rhythm on the roof overhead. Your lungs drag in air that smells of wet wood, damp thatch, and something cleaner, newly scrubbed. The storm, dramatic and messy and absolutely not optimized for your convenience, has moved on. Sleep finds you without permission. You close your eyes for a moment just to rest them from the constant gray glare, and next thing you know, the light has changed. When you open them again, the sky outside has shifted toward late afternoon. The rain is reduced to occasional half-hearted drops that plink from leaves and roof edges. In their place, a new sound rises, the low, irregular murmur of people moving through assessment rather than crisis. You stand carefully, joints stiff but functional, and step out into a world that looks both familiar and subtly altered. The air is cooler than you're used to in this place, the heat temporarily gentled by all that falling water. The settlement glistens. Walkways shine dark with moisture, leaves drip in slow, bright beads. Puddles form tiny new lakes between roots and posts, each one reflecting a patch of sky stitched with branches. Your own skin feels lighter now that the rain has stopped needling it, though your clothes cling with the stubborn loyalty of wet fabric. You make your way toward the river, out of habit, and because so much of today has orbited around that shifting line. The path is shorter than before, partly because you know every route now, partly because your mind is no longer preoccupied with questions about whether you belong here. The bank has changed. The landing still stands, braced by the extra logs and ropes you remember hauling, but the ground around it is raw. Chunks of soil have been bitten away, exposing roots that look startled to find themselves in open air. Driftwood and tangled vegetation lie in messy heaps where the water briefly climbed before retreating. You glance at the nearest marked tree. The newest wet line rings its trunk just below one of the pale scars you studied yesterday. The river came close, but not quite as high as it once has, according to that tree's quiet archive. One of your hosts steps up to the trunk with a small sharp stone and gently scrapes a fresh band along the bark where the water peaked. It is a soft sound, more like brushing teeth than carving history, yet you understand the weight of it. Another chapter added. No fanfare, just a record that says, "We saw, we endured, remember this." Back in the heart of the settlement, recovery unfolds as smoothly as preparation did. Walkways are checked plank by plank. Any that flex in suspicious ways are reinforced or replaced. A shelter, whose roof has lost a small portion of thatch, now wears a new patch of leaves, layered and tied in place. Mud is swept, not to banish it, that would be a pointless war, but to persuade it into less troublesome shapes, away from steps and common paths. Ash that got damp during the storm is carefully dried near relit fires, coaxed back into usefulness. You walk among these small repairs with the strange, floating feeling that comes after a crisis has passed, the body still braced, the mind slowly realizing it does not need to be. Children, who spent the storm narrowed into smaller spaces and tighter circles, have expanded again. They pick through the debris left by the river at the edges of the bank, finding new treasures, a smooth chunk of wood with an interesting knot, a shell from farther upstream, a long pale seed pod that rattles when shaken. The nervous edge in their laughter has dulled into something looser. The healer's work has shifted too. Earlier they moved like a steady pulse through the storm, patching urgent scrapes, checking for dizziness, quietly watching for the settled signs of bodies pushed too far. Now they perch beneath a roof with a bundle of herbs, rewrapping bandages, smearing fresh paste on raw rope burns, offering steaming sips of something sharp and revitalizing. When they take your hands and examine the red grooves across your palms, they do it with the same calm you've come to expect, but you notice a flicker of something like approval pass through their eyes. Bark-based ointment cools your skin, seeping into the abused ridges, leaving behind a faint scent of spice and leaf that is infinitely kinder than the chemical sting you're used to. Near the ceiba, the ground is darker, soaked deep but stable. The great tree stands unbothered, its buttress roots damp but solid. Its bark glows faintly in the washed light, paler where the rain cleaned it, darker in sheltered creases. You rest a hand against it, palm meeting cool, slightly rough wood, and feel something like the echo of last night's humming reflected back at you. The storm has not erased that quiet. If anything, it has layered itself on top, another verse in the same long song. Your painted arm has changed. Some lines have blurred, edges softened where rainwater and sweat smudged pigment. The triangles of rising water look a little less sharp, as if they have gone through their own flood and settled. Yet the pattern is still visible, the diamond near your elbow still dark and sure. It strikes you that this is appropriate. You were no longer quite the person who sat patiently while those lines were drawn. You were the version who leaned back against the ceiba, walked to the stone circles, tied ropes in a storm. The design records all of that now, even in its softened state. Small moments of relief flicker through the day. A canoe that had broken loose during the worst of the surge is found lodged against roots downstream, dragged back with ropes and laughter that is almost giddy. A shelter that looked precarious in the height of the storm reveals only minor damage, loose fibers, not structural breaks. A carefully tended patch of medicinal plants, which you half feared would be swept away, stands intact, leaves heavy with water, but rooted and thriving, as if the forest has decided this pharmacy is too useful to waste. Food appears again, as inevitably as gravity. The fire, which never fully went out, is coaxed into a stronger burn. Damp wood smokes heavily at first, then catches, flames licking upward in renewed, steady tongues. Fish that were caught before the storm, kept safe and cool, are laid out. Tubers washed clean by rainwater are sliced and settled into pots. The meal that emerges tastes different from the previous days, the same basic ingredients, but with an added layer of shared fatigue and relief that you can't name, yet recognize on your tongue. As everyone gathers around the hearth, shoulders touching, knees brushing, you notice it in the way they sit. Bodies lean a little more comfortably against each other. Laughter, when it comes, shakes loose more fully from chests. No one pretends the storm was nothing. The fresh marks on bark, the raw mud, the rope burns say otherwise. But the settlement is still here. The river has tested its patience and planning, taken a few bites at the edges, and then withdrawn. The balance is not perfect, but it is, for now, intact. You sit with your leaf plate, hands bandaged in soft fiber and bark paste, and feel the heaviness in your limbs gradually shift from battle-ready to simply tired. Around you the forest clicks and churs and drips, resetting itself after its own exertion. The storm has passed. The waters have receded. Paths have been redrawn in mud and memory, posts tightened, lines added to bark. In the quiet that settles over the evening, you realize you are not just visiting an ancient settlement in a rainforest. You have witnessed it remember how to survive, one more time, with you woven briefly into that long, resilient habit. You wake before the light fully commits to returning, in that tender gray pocket where night hasn't quite let go and day hasn't fully arrived. The village is hushed, resting in the aftermath of both storm and survival. Smoke rises from only a few early fires, faint lines against the dim sky. Your hammock creaks softly as you swing your legs over the side and stand, muscles protesting in a way that feels almost proud. This isn't the stiffness of sitting too long at a desk. It's the echo of work that actually mattered to more than your inbox. Outside, the air is cool enough to raise a brief shiver along your damp, dried clothes. The storm has left everything rinsed: roofs, leaves, walkways, even the air itself. You step onto the elevated path, wood dark and slightly slick beneath your feet, and breathe in the smell of wet thatch, smoldering embers, and earth that has had a very intense day and is now quietly steaming about it. The village feels like a chest taking a slow, deep breath after being held tight too long. You walk without quite deciding your route. Your body seems to know it wants to say goodbye in small, specific ways. You pass under familiar roofs, past bundles of drying herbs newly rearranged after the rain, past nets hung to drip and air, their fibers dark with moisture. A child is curled on a mat near a doorway, hair fanned across a woven pillow, fingers still loosely holding a palm-frond toy. Somewhere, a soft clatter suggests someone else is already awake, checking the damage that didn't show itself in yesterday's hurry. Your painted arm catches your eye again. The lines are faded at the edges now, smudged by rain, sweat, and rope. Triangles of water, the diamond of your own path, gentle ripples. The design looks less like crisp ink and more like something that has actually been lived in, imperfect, altered, but still clearly itself. A convenient little metaphor, as your brain can't resist noticing, even out here. You drift toward the ceiba, because of course you do. The tree stands exactly where you left it, which is both predictable and oddly reassuring. Drops still fall from the higher branches in slow, fat plinks. The bark near its base is darker from the soaking, but intact, unbothered. You lay your palm against it one more time. Cool, slightly damp, incredibly solid. You feel again that sense of being very small in a way that doesn't require fixing. You do not have to be a skyscraper. Sometimes it is more than enough to be a small, breathing animal leaning against something that knows how to stand through storms. At the tree's roots, someone has left a small cluster of objects, a few bright seeds, a feather, a twist of dried leaves. You add what you can. Nothing strangely heroic, just a tiny coil of fiber you twisted awkwardly on that afternoon in the weaving shelter, now tied into a loop. It's a quiet, unimpressive offering, but it carries the memory of your clumsy fingers finally finding rhythm. You tuck it into a crevice near the base of the trunk. For all you know, a bird or insect will steal it by midday. But for this moment, it's part of the Seba's hoard of stories. There is just enough time for one more short walk, so your path turns toward the edge of the forest, where the trail to the stone circles begins. You don't go all the way this time. You don't need to. A few steps into the denser growth, you can already feel the memory of moss-cushioned stone and carved spirals. The idea of those circles, hidden in their green amphitheater, quietly keeping track of centuries, sits inside your chest like a cool, smooth stone of its own. You realize you don't have to physically stand in them again to carry their timeline with you. It's already under your skin, layered beneath pigment and bark paste and sore muscles. Back in the heart of the settlement, morning stirs more distinctly. A small cooking fire catches and begins to crackle. The smell of something simple and warm, roots, grains, maybe leftover fish, slides through the air. A few sleepy smiles meet yours as you pass. Acknowledgements, not performances. The storm did its best, and everyone here, including the confused visitor from another world, did theirs in return. That's a bond that doesn't require speeches. Down by the river, a canoe waits at the landing, newly resecured after yesterday's chaos. Its hull is damp but sound, its ropes retied, its interior empty except for a small bundle of dried food and a water skin. The river has calmed too. It still runs higher than on your first morning, but its surface has regained some of its earlier composure, long, slow muscles moving under the skin of shifting light. The scars on the tree beside the bank are joined now by the freshest one, newly carved, still pale against the darker bark. You feel an odd, quiet pinch of pride when you look at that line. You were here for that one. You helped earn it. A small woven band finds its way into your hands. Its pattern echoes the marks on your arm, triangles, ripples, a single diamond at the center. The colors are subtle: earth, leaf, smoke, with one thin, brighter thread running through, like the brief flash of a fish turning in dark water. You slip it over your wrist. It settles into place with the easy certainty of something that was always meant to be there. This is not a souvenir for a shelf. It's a reminder disguised as decoration. Every time you see it, it will quietly ask, "Are you still breathing like the river, or have you gone back to holding your lungs hostage again?" You climb into the canoe once more, this time with your weight aligned to its balancing act, your feet finding the right spots without hesitation. The wood feels familiar under your hands now, textured and trustworthy. As the canoe is pushed away from the landing, there is no dramatic waving, no swelling orchestral score. Just nods, a hand raised here and there, a slow exhale of breath from the bank as the settlement's focus folds back into its own ongoing tasks. You are not the main plot twist here. You are a cameo, a quietly welcomed one, but a cameo all the same. Somehow, that feels perfect. The current catches the canoe and begins to draw you downstream. The village shrinks behind you, its raised roofs and walkways gradually dissolving back into the layered greens of forest. Smoke threads rise a little higher, then blend with low-lying mist that still clings to the treetops. Birds wheel overhead, unconcerned with your departure. The river resumes its habitual monologue, sliding past roots and stones, carrying branch and leaf, retelling its endless story to anyone patient enough to listen. You watch the banks slip by and realize that in some quiet, unadvertised way, you've been rewired. You know now what it feels like to let a place hold you instead of trying to dominate it. You know how it feels to move at the speed of walking roots and tying knots, to read a kind of clock made of shadows and scars rather than digits on a screen. You've seen how a community folds you in, not with fireworks, but with shared tasks, leaf plates, bark medicine, and the simple and powerful act of trusting you with the rope that keeps their landing in place. You're not naive. You know that when you open your eyes back in your own world, it will come rushing at you with its usual notifications and unfinished business. The river of your life there is full of very different debris. You still probably wouldn't survive an actual solo trek through the Amazon, and honestly, that's okay. This version, the dream, the narration, the gentle, impossible journey has done what it needed. It has given you a pocket of quiet, a new map drawn in triangles and diamonds and water lines, a ceiba tree standing patiently at the center of your internal forest. As the mist thickens and the outlines of the settlement fade completely from view, you feel the canoe begin to blur at the edges too, as if it's being gently overwritten by the darkness behind your closed eyes. The river keeps flowing, but now it's also the slow tide of your own breath, moving in and out, carrying with it the patience and resilience you borrowed from this place. You don't cling to the details. You let them settle like silt, trusting that what matters will remain at the bottom, solid and quiet, long after the dream's surface has smoothed over. The river sounds slip away now, like a volume knob turning slowly down, leaving only the faint echo of water moving somewhere very far inside you. The tall trees that have been watching you this whole time step back into shadow, their trunks and roots dissolving into the soft dark behind your closed eyelids. The ceiba remains for a moment longer, its pale trunk a single vertical line in the distance, and then even that softens, becoming nothing more than a feeling of being gently supported, spine aligned, shoulders unburdened. You lie there, wherever you are in the real world, and notice how different your breathing feels. Each inhale arrives a little deeper, as if it has to travel further into the forest you now carry under your ribs. Each exhale leaves a little slower, like the river easing down after a storm, no longer in a hurry to prove anything. Thoughts still appear, as they always do, small worries, odd memories, fragments of tomorrow's tasks, but they drift across the surface of your awareness like leads on that broad bronze-green water, bobbing, spinning, and moving on. You might remember the painted patterns on your arm, the soft moss on the stone circles, the smell of herbs crushed between warm fingers, the sound of many voices humming together under the ceiba. Or maybe by morning, those details will blur, leaving behind only a vague sense of having walked somewhere very far away and very safe. Either way, the important part is already with you. The knowledge that you are allowed to be small. That the world is big and old and strangely kind when you stop trying to hold it all together by yourself. So let your muscles release, one by one, the way the settlement finally relaxed when the waters receded. Let your thoughts thin out like fading rain. Let your body feel heavy and held, as if you've been carefully placed in the curve of a great root, wrapped in the hush of leaves and low river song. There is nothing you need to fix in this moment, nothing you need to remember perfectly, nothing you can possibly miss out on while you rest. The forest will keep watch, the river will keep flowing, the story will keep going, and you can step back into it whenever you're ready. For now, you can simply float, weightless and safe, on the quiet surface of your own breath. End of story. Sweet dreams.